So we launched Shop Small Sunday this year because empowering each other is a mandate at Nohble. And to that in each Sunday, we're highlighting entrepreneurs and creatives doing amazing things because 2020 has continued to challenge all of us. And now more than ever, it's really important to support each other. So this week's topic is a little bit different because we're here to talk about immigration. And with me today is Neena Dutta, immigration attorney extraordinaire. Neena Dutta is the principal of the Dutta Law Firm, located in New York City. The Dutta Law Firm is primarily engaged in the practice of immigration and nationality law. The firm successfully represents corporations, businesses, and individual clients throughout the United States and globally. In particular, the firm has serviced numerous hospitality, food and beverage, financial services, and entertainment clients. Neena is currently also a director on the American Immigration Lawyers Association Board of Governors, co-chair of the AILANY Advocacy Committee, National Sustainability Committee, and the Future of Immigration Law Task Force. She also works alongside nonprofits and volunteers pro bono at immigration detention centers across the US. In fact, Neena won the SABANY Pro Bono Attorney of the Year Award. She is also a frequent guest on NPR, WNYC, NY1, CGTV, and I-24 News as an immigration law expert. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right into it. Obviously, there's a lot going on. This is going to air on Sunday, but today is Wednesday, the day after the election, and we still don't know results yet. And so I think a lot of people are waking up this morning with a lot of questions. So just to jump and dive right into it, what drew you to practice immigration law?
Just in general, in truth, I wasn't, because I came here as an immigrant myself, I was like, I don't know that I want to do immigration law. In truth, I wasn't particularly, I tried to avoid it. And somehow I just kept coming back to, I understood what people were going through. I understood, I had a lot of empathy for the frustration with the process. And I was kind of good at it. And so I was like, you know what, maybe this is my calling.
So, we just talked about it briefly in your bio, but, you've obviously spent time and energy doing amazing pro bono work. And how do you do that with your busy law practice?
Yeah, I think you just have to make time for it. It's something that I feel strongly, if you have the knowledge, if you can share it, it's one thing to donate to causes, but if you actually have the ability to get stuck in and to be able to help people, I think we all have a duty to the community to help as many people as possible.
Yeah, and I can't agree with you more on that. Just, you have a unique skill set, and that's where you're most valuable. And so that makes total sense to me. Can you just share a little bit like what your experiences at the border has been like, and some of the instances that you've seen and been able to touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been multiple times to the detention center in Dilley, Texas. So it is very, very close to the border. It essentially is the place where they take, if they catch, in particular, women and children at the border, they will take them to Dilley to be processed. This has been going on for many years. And, under the current laws, if someone is fleeing violence, if they're fleeing their home state, they do have the right to present themselves and request asylum. So what was happening is, before there were any pro bono attorneys there, or before there were any anyone helping, a lot of times these families were just being shipped back. And actually, I could go on for hours about like what caused this, but in a nutshell, we don't live in a vacuum. Everything that we do, whether it's mass deportation of violent criminals, it creates gangs outside of the US, which then creates a surge coming to the US.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Nonetheless,
it's a
right,
circular chicken and egg problem.
right, right.
Wow, yeah.
But if you just want to take a snapshot, there is, I have interviewed hundreds of women who, at the end of the day, not one said, please save me. Every single one of them said, if you can do anything for my child, if you can protect, like the gangs tried to take my child, if when I go to work, I'm scared that my young son or my daughter, especially the preteen boys, are very much at risk of being recruited by gangs. And so, and a lot of times they don't have any choice,
Mhm.
and then it becomes, and so the only way is for them to try to escape. And people do try and go to other countries. It's really interesting. It's not just folks from South America that we saw in that facility. We actually saw a family from Romania, strangely enough, from Haiti, and people come through the southern border. But at the end of the day, um, no one is looking to come here for economic reasons. They really do just want a safe and viable future for their kids. You know,
So, so you said something really interesting a few minutes ago where you said like under the current laws, right? And so speaking to that of the election was yesterday. We don't have results yet, and obviously the outcome of this election will have lots of impacts on lots of different aspects of people's life, but it seems like will definitely have an impact on your work. And so, kind of, what do you posit stays the same? What are you thinking may change depending on who ultimately um, becomes the president of the United States?
right? So a second term president often has, especially someone as disloyal as the current president, doesn't necessarily care about Republicans being reelected. So it may be interesting, on the one hand, if the current trajectory continues. So some examples of things are the Remain in Mexico policy, which forces some of the migrants from Central America to seeking asylum, like forcing them to return to Mexico while their claims are being processed. That could continue. Ending TPS, that's temporary protected status. Now, TPS is in place to help, if there's a disaster, if people cannot go back to their countries, it's specifically mandated by Congress to protect people. Currently, there are about 300,000 individuals who are here on TPS. That means they're adding to the workforce. They have work permits, they pay taxes, they have valid work permits which allow them to integrate. They're not under the radar, they're not living under a rock, they're actually engaging in society. So that could end. There's been all these proclamations, well, supposedly to do with COVID, but it seems kind of there's a new one every day. And so, I've seen from my corporate clients, people getting stuck outside. So there's the danger of the slowing of regular green cards, people who work, they saw an enormous slowdown of their green cards being processed. The State Department, as in so consulates, when people have to come in, not being able to get their visas processed. I'll give you an example. I represent some universities, and everyone needs their professor on the first day of school. We have a handful of professors who are stuck outside, and so they've already missed the fall semester.
Oh,
So
wow.
There are remarkable universities here. People come to the US to get an experience, and it's robbing not only the native students of the US, but also, the whole idea of going to university is like you're learning, you're getting the best experience possible. So other things, there's also a denaturalization task force that was created under this administration. What that means is, so some people who have already gained their citizenship, their cases are being reopened and they're being revoked. So
Wow. So they're already a citizen. So like
already a
technically they
citizen,
might have been able to vote yesterday, but they
right, right.
might.
And there's,
Wow.
right, so there's a specific task force that's targeting people. Now they say it's, they've looked at their cases and there may be an incidence of fraud, but previously they've already gone through the process. There's already been several officers that have looked at their case during the green card application, but also the citizenship part. And so essentially they're saying that officer didn't do a good job. So we're going to reopen it and try and revoke your citizenship. So that's the kind of Trump plan, to continue more of that. We don't know what other horrors might be coming, but from the platform, and if Biden could still win, so the platform there is to reverse family separation for people who are detained, to reestablish and improve U.S. asylum policies, to reverse the changes to public charge. So public charge is, let's say you met someone from another country and you were going to get married. Right now, they have instituted a plan where it's the immigrant themselves has to prove that they're not a public charge. Now, you're very
What
successful,
does
but
public charge mean?
so public charge means, that someone's going to engage in taking public benefits.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. So
So
I'm not coming to become married to an American citizen solely so that
right,
I can then sign up for some sort of government assistance.
some sort of welfare programs.
Got
So
it. Okay.
what's the it sounds kind of, yeah, do we want people coming here and engaging in in taking welfare and stuff? That's not actually what happens. But what this rule has caused is, it's just made it harder for like younger people who are getting married, someone who doesn't have established credit, for someone who might have multiple children and they're sponsoring them. It really does make the US only for the very wealthy. And there are people who want to reunite with their family. It's not just about filing fees, it's also, people have various support networks. They're not necessarily looking to take advantage of, welfare or food stamps or anything, but they may not, the new public charge rule
But the
really.
difficulty is exactly what I think you said, that it's especially for young folks, right? Because if you haven't figured out what your career path is and you're still sort of a lot of us can imagine our first job out of college or our first jobs in high school, we were not necessarily doing something that we thought was going to be our life's work, right? And
Right,
that
right.
our careers were different, our financial circumstances were different, but it doesn't mean that you're like intending to come here to somehow like game the system, right?
Not
And
at all. Yeah. And it's really a shame, because think about all of our friends who, whose families came here. They really, there's such great diversity. It's one of the things that attracted me to coming to the US. There is incredible opportunity and incredible diversity. And essentially what this is doing is ending it. It's a concerted effort. So to continue with the Biden's plan, he would like to fully reinstate DACA. And I know we're going to get to that and talk a little bit about that. End workplace raids and order review of temporary protected status, which is TPS.
so I guess speaking, like you just said, let's talk about DACA, right? So I think, well, let's just, for folks who may not know, what is DACA?
So DACA is it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which, you know, when you think about, you know, when families come here, if someone was brought here as a child, it doesn't seem fair that, you know, I was brought here as a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old or even a 12-year-old, no knowledge of their home country or very little knowledge, and then they grow up in the US. So the law says that they have no rights to be here. You know, if their parents weren't able to, before they were 18 years old, to apply for anything, that child or that person now, when they become an adult, is here undocumented, to use the kind of pejorative term, here illegally. And the sort of, if they were to be picked up by the police, by ICE, they would be deported. So under the Obama administration, after much frustration of not getting any immigration reform, it was a presidential executive order. And anyone who was under the age of 31 who had arrived as of like June 2012, who came to the US before their 16th birthday, was able to apply. Now, it wasn't a green card, or DACA isn't a green card. All it is you're preventing being deported. So it's a stay of removal.
Okay.
Another benefit is you can then apply for an employment authorization document, like a work permit,
Okay.
and therefore get a social security number. This was a huge step in the right direction, because these were innocent kids that were brought here, regardless of how harshly people think that, like, well, that's not my problem, or, you know, their parents shouldn't have brought them here. The fact is they're here. They've been engaging in the school system. They have a lot of
And they've been here. If they're 30 years old and they came when they were 2, this is the only country they've known for 28 years of their life.
Right. And so, you know, one of the sort of great transformative things is all these people who have been here, you know, who would essentially, they'd hit their 18th birthday and they'd have to go into the shadows. You know, they were able to working, they were able to get a social security number. It was, you know, a really positive step. Yeah, so, you know, it's, the current administration has threatened to end this a couple times, but it's such a, you know, what a waste. Like, these are valuable citizens, but for their papers, they do not have, you know, the right to be here. But it's a great program.
So my understanding is obviously the Trump administration has not been supportive of this. And because this wasn't legislation that went through Congress, it's sort of subject to the whims of whoever is then the president, right? And so I guess all of the folks who are currently protected through DACA, and I know this has been going back in courts and all of this, but sort of what happens for them now, right? Like, are you still able to apply because it's held up in courts, or is that completely shut down? And then obviously what happens if Trump gets reelected or Biden gets elected? Are there certain things that folks who currently are here through DACA or still here through DACA should do maybe to protect themselves?
Yeah, so as of today, I know that people can still apply for DACA. You know, even if, and a big question that we always get is, it expired and I didn't know what to do, and I thought I couldn't apply. People can still, even with a gap, people can still apply. It's still possible. Now, until the day that they actually revoke it, still keep doing it. There's no harm in keeping on renewing it. That having been said, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, or, you know, when you apply, you are giving the government notice that you exist. Before that, and so it's, I don't dismiss people's fear at all that this could be an issue in the future, because we don't know who will come to power. It is something worth keeping in mind that a person who applies, all of a sudden, where the government didn't necessarily know you existed before, they do now. They have your address and they know you exist. So I know that sounds like a bit of sort of, not fear mongering, but but it's something to be aware of, that you put yourself on the radar where you hadn't before. But we'll sort of, maybe by the time Sunday rolls around, we'll have good news. But if we don't, something that I tell people at pro bono clinics all the time: if you're DACA, if you're undocumented, make sure that you have a friend who is a US citizen, or someone that is a safe person, who knows where you are, has your number, and who has copies of your documents. Because the most difficult,
a great recommendation,
is they can keep it on a Google Drive, they can keep, you could have a shared folder with them, but it's so important to have like almost like a buddy who will wonder where you are, and will has access to your documents. Because the toughest thing that happens is somebody gets picked up and then they have no proof of who they are, they have no access to their documents, they don't want to tell ICE I live here, because their family could be exposed. So it's one of the best ways of protecting yourself, is to make sure you have a trusted person who can,
who ideally is a US citizen, so that they're not worried about.
Right. And the US citizen part is literally to just to make sure that they themselves are safe.
So that's an amazing recommendation. What do people do if, let's say, somebody that suddenly sort of isn't around, and you think maybe they have been picked up? Like, are there numbers to call for that? Like, what would somebody do in that circumstance?
So, if someone completely disappears, it can be really difficult. What happens a lot of times is it's a kind of byproduct of somebody in the car took a wrong turn. The police stop them. They question everyone in the car. Or somebody is driving very close to the border. I tell people all the time, northern or southern, don't go on a joyride to San Diego. Don't, drive through Texas or Arizona really close to the border, because even if you're on the US side, they still have the right to stop you and to search the car and ask you questions. So what happens more times than not is not that someone just disappears, it's that they'll get stopped for,
something completely unrelated.
Yes, some sort of traffic violation, maybe a domestic issue, something that's unrelated. More questions get asked, they get taken in. So a lot of times, whoever the officer is that takes them in will have a number or detention center. Usually you can follow up with, even the police precinct where they were picked up. But, one of the things that's very chaotic is, someone could be picked up in New York and then shipped to somewhere in New Jersey and then sent to Ohio. Because these detention centers are for profit, there's not necessarily, they'll kind of take, they're very incentivized to keep the detention centers full because they make money, which is, I know, a whole other, that affects American youth as well, the for-profit prisons, but for-profit detention centers really have exacerbated the problem. there's no incentive to resolve this when people are making just extraordinary amounts of money from incarcerating people.
So that nugget really was something that I hadn't thought about, but I think makes so much sense, and I hope people hear this. And I think everything is about having a plan, right? So this year it's have a COVID plan, it's have a voting plan, and this is also like have a plan if you're somebody who is vulnerable, or if you have family members who are, to have a plan for what to do in certain circumstances, just like you described. So I
And
think
I
that,
know this is,
yeah, as a
yeah,
takeaway is like have a plan, right?
I know this is directed to small businesses. As small business owners, it's not for you to, ask your workers like what's going on, but just have information available. People might not want to be, you might not know if someone has a family member who's
Mhm.
undocumented, but just having that support, having that information, as a employer, you are, if you have employed under the I-9 rules someone who's undocumented, like, you are exposed.
Mhm.
But there's all kinds of ways that people know of someone. So just providing kind of information is important, because the worst cases that we see are American kids were, they were born here, they're under the age of 10, the parents get picked up, and then these kids are just by themselves, either go into foster care. So having like an extended family member
Mhm.
who, knows to come and pick up the kids, or, being able to notify someone, a friend, a co-worker, that like, this is happening to me, please make sure my kids are okay.
That's really important, yeah. Um, so one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about was obviously in the news quite a bit over the last few years has been what is called the Migrant Protection Protocol. And so this is me as a layperson trying to explain what this is, but basically people are coming to this country to seek asylum, but before you can actually physically come here, you're being held in Mexico. And to me, this just raises a whole bunch of questions, just because, like, are these Mexicans or are they people from other countries? And how are we just forcing them to stay in a completely different country than our own? Um, and like, I don't totally get that. And then how, and I'm not 100% sure if this was part of or related to the program that under the Trump administration was separating families, and sort of what updates are potentially on that, depending on how the election shakes out, and just maybe a little bit more clarity on kind of like what is happening at the border, um, in a way that we can understand.
Yeah. So migrant protection protocol, or as we all refer to it, MPP,
Okay.
is essentially, they were finding that if people were able to come to the US and they were in these detention centers, which they had to keep people in detention centers, then people like my organizations that I'm associated with, as folks were able to be represented by lawyers, a lot of times people were able to make their case, and they were able to be released and start their asylum case. So this was a way to make it harder for people to connect with legal representatives. So yes, you're correct, it's in Mexico. It's not people from Mexico. And just to give you a little sort of anecdotal statistic, in a day I would speak to like over 100 individuals, 100, um, uh, pro bono clients, and it was actually very rare to come across someone who was a Mexican national. The majority of people who were in detention who were fleeing violence were from El Salvador, Ecuador, and Honduras. And so, sorry, I said Ecuador, Guatemala. So there really wasn't a ton of people from Mexico. So MPP is essentially a agreement that the US made with the Mexican government that they could set up these makeshift, not even courts, but processing centers outside the US. So it's a combination of intimidation as well as barring access to, I have friends that have gone there. I mean, they're completely overwhelmed. There was a case where a American immigration lawyer was turned away from getting into Mexico because they didn't want her to be able to go and help people there. So, it's really a time in our history which is, we should be ashamed. It's like I said, people are not coming to make money. They're not coming to take your jobs. They really are fleeing. And it's, when I said before, it's as the law stands. It's a UN treaty that the US agreed to, many, many years ago, that anyone seeking asylum is given a fair hearing. And so what MPP is essentially doing is it's lumping everyone outside the US. And there's so much misinformation. It's dangerous. There's that people get, I'll give you an example that friends have told me. Everyone's given, they take numbers and last names in batches. If you miss your last name, it could be a week, could be like a couple weeks before they recall you. Wow. And people are just, it's so much chaos. It's been created by, it was unnecessary.
So, I mean, I think one of the other big takeaways, it sounds like, is just immigration is very complicated, legal, sort of the undocumented or legal, right? Either way, it's just very complex, complicated. It's frustrating. It sounds like there's a lot of time, paperwork, everything. And that's something that I think, regardless of how you come about it, is just a very complicated, time-consuming, confusing process. And so I just wonder, if obviously we're lumping in generalities, people have all different sort of issues, questions, comments, concerns. Like, what would you advise if somebody listening to this has some sort of immigration related question? Should they reach out to an attorney? Should they, what would you advise as a professional?
So I think the best way is to not just reach out to an attorney, but reach out to someone who's trusted, someone who of their reputation, or somebody can give you a recommendation. Because I see this all the time. Just because someone has a JD does not mean they're qualified to help you. And I've seen folks be put in a much worse position because they went to someone who wasn't reputable. Don't forget, there's also a lot of NGOs, so non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, who, are very capable of, if not helping people directly, but then giving them recommendations. So, for example, Catholic charities at the southern border, there's Aldea or Ultralada. So I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA. If someone is a member of AILA, they're more likely to, be familiar with all the new regulations. And there is a part of the website that has a list of lawyers there. One of the things I see within immigrant communities a lot is people go to notarios or non-lawyers, and because a lot of times it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. And sometimes these people can screw up someone's life completely. So I've seen this in, sort of very, immigrant communities where they're not as comfortable with their English, they're maybe intimidated to go to an attorney. Most attorneys have someone who can translate for them if they don't speak the language themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want people to get more and more comfortable with going to sort of an attorney or someone that can, with a good reputation, who can help them. It's really important that people get the right kind of help.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? That's why people, even medical fields say, like, I'd like a second opinion. And it's because when you're making really important decisions for your health, for your well-being, which, getting immigration situation sorted would count as, that it really does matter to do your homework and shop attorneys, and obviously we understand that people's financial circumstances may be very different, and so I think it's a great call that you mentioned that there are nonprofit organizations or attorneys like yourself who are doing pro bono work where you might be able to work through an organization to get the representation that you ultimately need. So
and I tell people, if you got arrested, if something happened and someone was going to take you to jail, 9 times out of 10, people will do anything they can to get the best criminal attorney to get them out of jail. Immigration is a bit like, it's not jail, but it's keeping you here. So it is an investment in your future. Now, that might sound self-serving, like, but I think it's worth the investment to, sometimes there isn't a pathway. And, the best immigration attorney is the person who will be very honest with you and say, listen, these are your options. It's not looking good. This is potentially what we can do, but most likely you are barred from this, or this application.
mm-hmm.
But it's still worth actually, getting facts and getting the information.
Absolutely. And so kind of in closing on that note, this has been amazing. Thank you so, so much for sharing your expertise. I mean, and I think, it really helps to make this a relatable conversation, I think, for a lot of people who may not know what's going on with people around them, right? And I think that was a great call out, especially speaking to folks who, like myself, are in the business community and we have customers or employees and we don't necessarily always know what their backgrounds are, and that people may have a lot of complicated things going on, and it's really important to hear, listen, and try to be of service. So thank you for that. In conclusion, I just am thinking that if anyone listening today has legal questions, might be in need of immigration-related legal services, how do they reach the Dutta Law Firm?
So the best way, you can either use our form on duttalawfirm.com, or you can email me at ndutta, that's ndutta, at duttalawfirm.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.